Okay, we're here at the Institute for Policy Studies, and I'm here with Janet Redman. And tell me your title here, Janet,
Sure. I'm the co-director of the Sustainable Energy and Economy Network at IPS.
and what kind of work are you doing these days?
Well, I'm doing a lot of work around climate change issues, particularly internationally. And in that respect, following the United Nations negotiations and also following climate finance, which is basically the money that needs to be repaid as part of the climate debt that the global north owes the global south.
Do you plan to be going to Durban in late November?
I do. Yep, I plan to be there this year. In large part, I think because while the UN space is obviously not the only place, and maybe not even the most important place where we need to deal with climate change, we need to deal with it locally, nationally, in our communities, in our households. I think Durban's a really important moment, in part because of the history of the social movements in South Africa, but also because I think there have been a lot of events over the last year. Um, that are bringing new awareness around climate change to a large part of civil society. I think it's important that people recognize and understand, in particular, the impact in Africa. And so I think it's important for folks to be there to kind of explain that impact, explain those issues to a lot broader audience. That's part of why I'll be there.
And that's why we did the action today here in Washington, D.C., in front of the White House. I did the action and was arrested on Monday, and today is Wednesday, and Janet was just arrested, and I was really surprised how fast Janet went through the system. It
Got
took me 3 hours. I think it took you less than two.
Yep,
Huh?
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
pretty amazing. Tell us about your experience and generally why are you against the Keystone XL pipeline?
Sure. So this is actually my first time being arrested. It's my first time even risking arrest. Thank
Congratulations.
you very much. It felt actually incredibly empowering. I've been a part of trying to work on climate justice. So trying to think about climate action, but really from a justice perspective for a number of years. I've done things like work on sign-on letters. In fact, I've coordinated sign-on letters globally. I've done lobbying in Congress. I've talked to the administration. I've written articles. I've talked to people in my community. I have my own community garden plot.
I saw your article that was just in Alternate, yes, and it was three reasons to be against the
Yeah.
Keystone pipeline. Tell us those three reasons.
Yeah. The three reasons that I think are most important. One is that the tar sands are an incredibly dirty source of fossil fuels. They take three times as much. They take 3 barrels of water to process every barrel of oil. They are the second largest sink of carbon dioxide in the world after Saudi Arabia, and so extracting the tar sands oil will release that massive store of greenhouse gases, which James Hansen has basically, the NASA climate scientist, has says if we release that CO2, it's game over for the fight against climate change. That's one big reason, just because of the climate change impacts in a time when we've seen record wildfires, record tornadoes, record floods, record heat waves in the United States alone. I think that's telling us something that, climate change is really real. It's not the time to be exacerbating climate change. It's time to solve it. The other two reasons, one is that tar sands themselves are an incredibly dirty fuel. They're killing people where they're extracted up in Alberta. First Nations communities in particular
From
are
the
impacted.
big tailing ponds that
Huge,
they leave behind,
absolutely huge wastewater
the
ponds.
tremendous amounts of water and natural gas
Exactly.
it takes to heat up the bitumen, they
That's
call
right.
it, so they can get it into the pipeline.
That's
And
right.
I think they really want to get to the ports so they can get on the world market.
Right, and that's the other health impact is on the other end of the pipeline in the Gulf state communities. We actually, today was the Gulf State Day, so a bunch of folks were here from Texas and Louisiana talking about the BP oil spill, talking about recovering from Katrina and the toxic pollution that really caused them. And they were saying, don't give us another toxic burden to bear. Burning bitumen is actually it contaminates, it has more contaminants than regular crude oil, and so the pollution associated with it is even is even greater for communities to bear who live around where it's refined. The third reason is the pipeline itself. It crosses 6 states, the United States. It crosses many, many major rivers, including the Missouri River, the Red River, Yellowstone River, and the Ogallala Aquifer, which is a drinking water source for 2 million people in the U.S. And the first stage of that pipeline, called Keystone 1, which has been around for about a year, has already ruptured 12 times. So if that's the track record we're going on, and we're talking about crossing, the entire United States from north to south, the pipeline itself is a problem in that sense.
Yeah, I spoke with spokesman with Bold, Nebraska. They're here with some of the farmers, and they're really concerned about the sandhills, I believe, and of course the aquifer. It's very close to the surface, and I asked her, uh, it's they ponds come up that's so close to the surface, and I don't know what they would do to if there were a spill underground, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's the problem is that, we know some of the impacts. We've seen oil spills. We've just dealt with BP. The the reality is that the situation when we see contamination is always worse than what we can see. It's like its own iceberg, right? We see what's at the surface. We don't see what's in our drinking water, what's in the soil, what's captured in the soil. And remediation has gotten better than it ever has been. It's always getting better, but it's not the same as not harming the environment in the first place. So it's really one of these moments where we can choose, well, actually President Obama can choose to use the precautionary principle and say, no, I'm not going to give this pipeline a permit in November. In fact, we're going to use that energy we would have, energy in terms of political energy, to work toward renewable energy in our country. I think that's what common sense calls for. We've got a climate crisis. We know the potential disasters, both in terms of human health and environmental integrity. Let's take that and instead move toward thinking about renewable energy, wind, solar.
That's why this is such a defining moment,
Yeah.
because we have the choice now. Obama has the choice uh, to continue business as usual, or stop the pipeline and start going to renewables.
Yeah, and my sense really is that Obama kind of owes us in a lot of ways. A lot of people put a lot of faith in him when they elected him president, that he actually stood for the kind of change that he talked about in the campaign trail. We have yet to really see that in the climate front. He's done some things. He in his tenure so far, the EPA has been making new rules around greenhouse gas pollution, and that's really important. It's very challenging, of course, with this Congress going after the EPA's ability to do so. He's done some mid and heavy truck standards in terms of fuel efficiency. That's great. That's wonderful. That's not to be poo-pooed, but that's not the same thing as comprehensive climate policy that has a justice lens. I mean, not just any climate policy, not climate policy that lets big polluters out, not one that includes carbon trading and allows people to shift pollution around and continue polluting in the same communities who've borne the burden of all of our energy choices in the past, but really one that takes into account that we need to conserve first, consume less, relocalize our economy, and put resources into R&D, research and development, in real renewable energy resources.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that he's allowed Shell, I believe, to drill in the Arctic, and opened up Wyoming to mine more coal. Isn't that a contradiction?
It's a real problem. It's funny. I was recently in Wyoming, and it's fascinating because it's big, vast open spaces, and you see in the same shot, you see new windmills, new wind turbines that are going up, and you also see actually coal pumps. I mean, not coal pumps, oil pumps. And yes, and it's just been opened up to more oil exploration and extraction. So there is an inherent contradiction going on, which is that people are starting to understand that renewable energy makes economic sense. They're not quite off the idea yet that we've still got all this cheap coal and other kinds of cheap fossil fuels. So part of what Obama needs to be doing is, it's great that he talks about environmental issues. It's great that he gives lip service to renewables, for example, but he needs to be working with his other parts of his administration to do things like shift the subsidies to fossil fuel into renewable energy resources. So there are some very concrete things that he can do at an administrative level. And to be honest, there's pressure that he needs to be putting on Democrats and everyone in the House and Senate to clean up their act. Really, that's a bottom line issue. We hear a lot in D.C. that it's Congress's fault that the administration can't act, but both say the other thing. The administration says we can't have Congress. Congress says the administration's not sending us a strong enough signal. So it's time for Obama to really send a strong signal. And I think this permit process and not allowing this permit to go through would be a first real kind of line in the sand. That would be a good signal.
And he did promise in his inauguration speech, right? So
That's
let's
right.
hold him to that
That's right.
promise.
That's right. I mean, I think that's what's amazing about you being here all the way out from California is that, what we saw in the past 4 days and today again, people from all over the country really saying, yeah, we are going to hold him to that promise. We're not out here to scream and yell at him, but we're here to say, it's enough. It's enough. And we want you to move in the right direction in the environment and particularly in dirty fuels.
Well, thank you very much, Janet. Janet Redman of the Institute for Policy Studies.
Thank you so much for having me here.